This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
Hello, I'm Janet Ledger, the CEO of Community Business, and I'll be your host for today's podcast. Today we're absolutely delighted to be up for discussion with Holly McGhee, who is the Asia Pacific Director for Diversity, Equity and Inclusiveness at EY. Holly drives innovative programs across a multitude of diversity, equity and inclusiveness dimensions at EY. Holly is focused on supporting leaders to foster an inclusive environment where people can feel that they better leverage their diverse skills, experiences and backgrounds. She's responsible for developing the DE&I strategy, building inclusive leaders, designing equitable processes and systems, and fostering a sense of belonging for all. Holly works to optimise innovation, improve engagement, and build a culture of inclusion within her organisation. Originally from the UK, Holly has worked in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia. Holly holds a BSc in Business Studies from Loughborough University. She is a certified executive coach and has completed postgraduate studies in organisational psychology through the University of Cambridge, as well as completing a course in the science of wellbeing at Yale University. Most recently, Holly was awarded EY's Master of Sustainability by Holt Business School and joined the first EY cohort to receive this qualification. So, Holly, thank you so much for joining us for Up for Discussion.
Thank you, and thanks for such a nice welcome.
So, the first question is, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your interest in the topic of social mobility?
Sure, thanks, Janet. So as you mentioned in your intro, I've lived and worked in many different places. I'm originally from the UK, and so my own interest and link to this topic is really going to a public school and joining the workforce and feeling different because of it. And there are a number of factors that really drive that for me. It's obvious things like my accent, perhaps my style a little bit as well, but also the network that I noticed people had, the connections because of the schools they'd gone to and the universities and the courses, that I felt like an outsider. And really looking around at leaders, I didn't see anyone like me. I didn't hear anyone like me either. I think over the time I've been with EY, I probably have had my own social mobility experience. My accent's perhaps a little bit different. I have lived and worked in 4 different countries since joining EY about 13 and a half years ago. But I always think back to those first 6 months when I joined in London. People would refer to me as the Essex girl because of my accent. And I really felt that there were moments where I wasn't looked at for my potential, but perhaps more because of where I'd come from. And that then also makes me sort of reflect back to when I was at school and the expectations that were put on us as to where you might go in life. And for me, I was always very interested in fashion and the fashion industry. And so working in a shop was sort of a sense of direction of somewhere that I might go when I finished school. I studied textiles, I studied graphic design. And so it seemed like that was the direction I was being nudged in. So I still sort of pinch myself that I work at a global corporate, and I've had such an amazing opportunity to travel and work with so many different people and really find myself and my place as well.
Your story really resonates because I, have a very similar background in terms of where I was raised and the kind of schooling that I had, and I do get that feeling of not feeling like you fit in. I only 24 years in a major corporate in Australia, and there were many times where, the background was either explicitly raised or it was sort of implicitly indicated that I wasn't in the club. So I get that feeling. So yeah.
And I think with that, it's perhaps also the sense that I put on myself as well. So if I look back and I can think about some real moments where imposter syndrome was living in me, and I was waiting for the time to be told, you can't do this presentation because of your accent or because of how you speak. Even though I've got a big vocabulary, I've got great results from school, there's still this sort of perception that you hold in yourself, and that you don't see other people like you, and the imposter syndrome that can live there as well. So, and it doesn't go away.
No, it never goes away. You know, I mean, I still carry that. You know, I still have moments like that where it's sort of pinching myself. What am I doing in this room? And, you know, like people from where I grew up, you know, it just doesn't, you know, my life could have taken a very different path. Yeah. I know that social mobility is an important topic at EY. Also, it can mean different things to different people. So what is your definition of social mobility, and what do you believe to be the essential characteristics when defining it?
So it's a very big question. I think something we're all very curious to continue to unpack. But I can answer from where we are today with a note that I am a student who is curious on this topic, and certainly not an expert. But when I think about social mobility, it's really the movement of looking at where an individual started and the origin of that individual and where they are as an adult. And is there a difference, and how different is the starting point to the current state or the trajectory? There's many different markers as well that this topic has been talked about around the world in different ways. I think the UK is quite progressed. It's a topic that certainly I was very familiar with the term growing up. It's not a new term in that sense. That markers in the UK would be things like, do you have free school meals? The roles that your parents did when you were 14. Are you the first to go to university or first to have a certain level of qualification? I think we're still interpreting that for this part of the world, and understanding or keen to understand how does this resonate, and what is social mobility for Asia. I'm also mindful that for the first time since World War II, that the current generation are looking at a social mobility journey that they might not be as well off as their parents were. So that's also a big shift in the economic direction of the countries that we're working in, that the macro or the aggregated social mobility of a country or territory isn't as linear as it once was. And so thinking about social mobility in that sort of absolute sense is also something I'm quite interested in.
So why is this research into social mobility and resource development so essential to Asia?
I'm finding it's a relatively new topic for Asia, and as I've spoken to many of my DE&I colleagues at other organisations, I think we're all sort of at similar points of recognising that this is a worthwhile topic to be having, but we're still understanding what that will look like. And ultimately, as a D&I professional, what are the programs, what are the interventions, the strategies that can that can create impact? And when I think about the conversations I've been part of, certainly at EY, we do not want to become a social mobility machine. We would like to become a place where people who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds can thrive, can really bring their full selves, the different perspectives that they have, different experiences, and together add value to our organisation. So it's as much about bringing people into the organisation, but without forcing them to feel like they have to change or pretend to be something that they're not, if that's not what they want to do. And for me, it's been part of that journey has been reclaiming that I'm from Essex, and this is where I grew up, and my accent is my accent, and all of that experience is part of who makes me. And to help others to see the value that people have from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but without forcing the need to shift and to move as well. So I think for Asia as well, we're seeing such growth of organisations that attracting talent is continuing to be a hot topic with governments as well as organisations. And so really looking at a broader mix of diversity pillars that we might call diversity demographics, finding that socio-economic status, conversations on social mobility are really resonating. I've held a number of focus groups and interviews and heard so many inspiring stories of people who have come from perhaps the lower socioeconomic backgrounds, joined our organisation, been able to thrive, but with that helped to lift their community, their family, and the community that they're in. for others, I think the story is really about living to their potential and finding their own career path and trajectory that where they're able to thrive.
Because for some of the work I needed to do for an assignment last year when I was still completing my degree, it was really interesting to see the statistics on education in the East compared to the West, in Asia as compared to the West. In the West, we're actually seeing a decline in education levels. And so Singapore, I think, was leading the world. Hong Kong, mainland China were right up the top in terms of the amount of people who are first-time educated or first-generation educated, whereas it was trending a little bit backwards in a lot of the Western countries, which I thought was really interesting. And it's so nuanced here as well, isn't it, like the difference in Asia. And it's not going to be the same between Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Japan. Like there'll be that variance as well, which I think we won't necessarily understand a lot about, and we're hoping the research will tease more out around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the complexity of this part of the world across all the work we do in DE&I is something that we think about, and I like the approach we're taking with the research, that we will do those deep dives at a country level so that we can seek to understand more about the meaning of social mobility, but also the impact of coming from different socio-economic groups and the way that organisations can create this sense of belonging for everybody.
Yeah, because I heard or read a really good quote. It was actually in one of our award submissions, and it was basically saying that, you know, the inclusion and raising people up is not about creating the space in the existing systems and the existing networks. It's about growing them enough so that everybody's accepted. And you know, like there's a room for the voices of others, as opposed to turning into what everybody else is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really makes sense.
Well. Could you please tell us what motivated you to be part of Community Business's research project and the Capacity of Knowledge Partner, and why is this partnership so important to EY?
Well, firstly, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity for EY to be the knowledge partner for this. We've been talking about social mobility globally now for quite a while. So thinking about what is the terminology that we'd like to use, knowing that there is such a breadth of ways that social mobility is spoken about. And then, of course, how do we translate that into real impact? And for me, being part of the research will give us front row seats to not only asking the questions and interacting with the data itself, but to then shape the conversation and to shape the way that we then work with other corporates to support their social mobility strategies. Certainly, I'll be looking to this research to help inform our approach as well at EY. But I think there's probably a bigger piece to it, that in speaking with people who come from different backgrounds, that there is sometimes the perception that this is not a world for you, that there is a world that is reserved for people from a certain background, who have a certain family, who have a certain education, whatever those drivers are. And my hope with this research is that we can also talk to the people who might opt out of corporate careers because they think that they shouldn't be in the room, or that there's not a place for them. My hope is the research will give us a roadmap to create that sense of belonging and a sense of inclusiveness for all people to really see themselves. And the strategies that we create, of course, will be enabling that as well.
Fantastic. Why is partnering on this research important to EY?
So research has been core to our DE&I strategy for a number of years. Last year, we published a primary research into belonging across Asia Pacific. And we found that organizations with a high sense of leadership supporting DE&I strategies, as well as organizations that celebrated difference within the workforce, had a much higher sense of belonging across all of the workforce, up to 3 times as high. What we also found is within the workforce, there was an uptick, again, up to 3 times in retention and productivity, which equated to about $100 billion on the table. So it shows the importance of this topic as a business strategy, that the numbers are big, and the things that many organizations are going after at the moment, retention, productivity, engagement, can be found when you have inclusive leaders and create that culture of belonging for everybody. So bringing social mobility into that conversation is another element of the DE&I conversation. It's probably up until now been quite a hidden element. It's not something people feel as open or as comfortable to talk about. And we're hearing that particularly in many of the Asian markets. But through the research, we can give voice to those people. We can dig deep into the countries that we're surveying to really understand more about the drivers as well as the opportunities for organisations to create a culture of belonging, no matter what your socio-economic identity is.
Fantastic. And finally, a question that we like to ask all of our guests. What do you think the biggest way we can make a ripple of change through society is?
I've been thinking about this question since you sent them to me last week. And I think for me, the biggest thing we can do is to listen and to absorb the education. One of the pieces of our strategy this year has been to create capability uplift across our tens of thousands of people in Asia Pacific with learning on inclusive leadership skills, upstanding interventions. We've also designed and deployed a number of specific trainings to support with allyship of different groups. And the education opportunity is huge. And with organisations as big as ours, I really see a platform that we can inspire conversations, but also provide access to role models. That in those sessions, in those conversations, there's storytelling, there's reflection, there's opportunity for conversation and dialogue, and building empathy with different backgrounds. So education and role modelling, I think, are two of the most important things that we can do to really create that positive change for acceptance and belonging across our organisations.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks again for joining us this morning. And, thanks from Community Business, because we're super excited to be kicking this research off and to be partnering with you and most of all seeing the insights we get from that. But thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.